switch into English.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Droidkast.LIVE, the show where awesome Android engineers will come to tell us about their stories and how they found their place in the industry. And in the second part, our guests will show us a piece of their knowledge that can help us boost our careers. As the name mentioned, Droidkast.LIVE is a live event, so you can use the chat to communicate with the other attendees, and I'll try to introduce some of your questions during the show. For today, we have Fernando Cejas as our first guest. I'm really happy to have you here, Fernando.
Hello, Antonio. It's a pleasure from my side as well. You know it.
Yeah, when I decided to do this show, it was you the first I thought about, because I think you are the perfect guest to start with, and we have been friends for a long time, so
Oh yeah,
it was easy to start with you. So
right. Yeah, no, totally up for that. To be honest, I mean, we always, just to the audience, we always have like nice chats and we share some knowledge and so forth, play some jokes and so forth, and we have been sharing a lot of stuff lately. So, yeah, man, how can I say? You're my friend. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here. So, for the little ones that don't know about you, please tell us who are you, what are you doing right now, and a little introduction.
All right, cool. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, hi everyone. I hope you guys are going to have like a lot of questions. I mean, we're here actually to have a lot of fun today. We were actually talking about it, before starting. We caught up with Antonio a little bit. So, yeah, for all of you who don't know me, my name is Fernando Cejas. I've been a software engineer, I would say, for the last 18 years, more or less, 38 now. And yeah, I've been touching like many technologies, had a lot of headaches. I guess you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do.
Yes. And part of my background, it's lately in the last few years, I've been working on mobile technologies, especially focusing on Android. That's how we knew each other, I guess, Antonio.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, since a while, yeah. And yeah, so I started working mostly on Android since the beginning. I think like version 0.9, it was pretty much a prototype. Yeah, went through some companies in Spain, then relocated to Germany because of SoundCloud, where I spent a few years. Now I have to be honest with all of you, like I've been doing Android, but also like focusing on other technologies lately, mostly quantum computing and all this nerdy stuff and so forth. But it's something that I'm doing aside as a developer advocate at IBM. So it's mostly research and so forth. And part of my time, I spend it at conferences. These are more like enterprise conferences, but that doesn't mean that I'm not attending other conferences. I'm still keeping it up with all of you, and I really appreciate that, and I like all the feedback I'm constantly collecting. And yeah, of course, a big fan of open source, which is something a big defender of. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's pretty much more or less.
Nice. No problem, because we'll know a little more about you in the next question. So
Yeah,
we
cool.
can get deeper in the next ones.
Absolutely.
First, to start with, if you want, tell us a little about your story. Where are you from? How was your childhood, and what you led to start in the world of software development?
Yeah. Cool. I mean, I like when I was talking to you about this initiative that you had, it was very interesting to have another view. Like most of the time when we listen to podcasts and so forth, we are, mostly focused on the technical side of things. I mean, which is very interesting, and we are going to be touching that over,
Of course.
this time, of course. But I think also it's very important to know the background. The same way I know you. Probably next time I should interview you. Because then the audience.
We can ask them. Maybe they are interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty sure the audience is interested into that. So yeah, I mean, as I said, like I started like way long time ago. It was pretty much out of curiosity. I started with, the typical hardware, the typical person, IT person, teenager, which, knows a little bit of, I don't know, PCs repair. And, and then you're able to repair washing machines, MP3 players, like the typical, oh, since you know about computers, can you fix my washing machine or my dishwasher?
Yeah, I know that. My computer is not working anymore. Can you
Yeah,
fix it?
absolutely. So after that, I mean, I studied software engineering, and yeah, I mean, I started studying and working at the same time. I had the opportunity to always kind of focus on what I liked it. I mean, of course, you always have to do something else, but in the end, I had to say, for all of you who are out there, we're in this bubble, who is being developed more and more over the time, and it's super nice that we have the opportunity to work in IT. There's a lot of chances out there, and I took part of that too.
Mhm.
I'm originally from Argentina, from a little town in the middle of nowhere. Family business, a bakery, so I kind of know about bakeries. I will accept questions about bakery stuff as well.
Yeah, I know you know a lot about it too.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of that, and it's part of my past. I helped a lot, my family to run the business there in the little town, which is called Las Parejas. For all of non-English speakers, that means the couples. So, if you ask me where that name is coming from, I'm so bad at history. I read it. It's supposed to come from two lakes that were over there, but yeah, that's all I know. Uh, yeah, what else? And yeah, I relocated from my little town to a bigger city in order to study. And then at some point, I decided to relocate to Spain, to Barcelona, where, I got to know a lot of valuable people, in between them, other colleagues, which, who are very also well known, who I learn a lot from. I'm totally grateful for that, and yeah, I mean, over the time, there's a bunch of stories that probably I will be mentioning, in today's presentation. Yeah, I was always like a startup person. I like, creating things and so forth. Had three failed attempts so far while being in Barcelona, but that gave me the opportunity to also relocate for a bit to the US, gain all this experience, be in Silicon Valley for a bit. I think that's very valuable, and I don't consider it, a failure. You will see again, like actually the talk is called "The Art of Coding Disasters and Failures." It's about the lessons learned, from coming from that. But
Yeah,
that's pretty much, yeah.
it may sound like a cliche, but we all learn from our mistakes. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
always, yeah,
Totally,
it's
totally.
always, everything is a learning and an adventure. So
Absolutely,
that's great.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And when you moved to Barcelona, you started right at Tuenti, or I knew about you when you were there, but I don't know if you started there or.
Yeah, so I mean, for all of you, Tuenti was a very popular social network. Now it's more like a phone career in Spain. Back then, it was way more popular even than Facebook. It was a super nice company, with a lot of talented people out there. I'm so grateful for that, that I had the opportunity to join them and learn a lot out of that. Um, yeah, no. To answer your question, I started in a very tiny startup, working on RFID technology, which is, this, technology about detecting tags. Like it's the father of, let's say, NFC, where you have tags and so forth. And then I had like a bunch of, these startup attempts, and then it's at some point, I run out of money because you're betting on your own projects. And it's like you're coming back to, I was coming back from the US with my pockets totally empty. Uh, and then I decided, okay, before going and live under a bridge, I would definitely, search for a proper job, and and again, I started the interviews and got to know a lot of people there. And then, yeah, and then after that is when I spent a few years there. Then I decided to travel a little bit for some time. Got a ping from SoundCloud here in Germany, and then I decided, okay, it's a good chance. Why not? I will try it out. And then
That's
yeah.
that's great. And I wanted to ask you about it because was it difficult to move to a country with a different language that not only because you told that you were in Silicon Valley for a while, but it was difficult in Germany to as a non-native speaker to be there, and
Yeah.
tell us a little about that.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a very interesting point because I think one of when I relocated to Spain, one of the things that I thought about was the language barrier. Since I'm Spanish speaker, a native Spanish speaker, then that would facilitate a lot of things. Especially
Yeah.
communication and integration into the culture and so forth. So I think, I mean, one of the things that we sometimes as professionals are afraid of is like to big changes, right? I mean, we are afraid of this uncertainty, this, black box, you know, um, and I encourage people to do that. I mean, it's never easy in the beginning, but it's also fun. You had to make it fun. For me, even staying in the US, was a bit difficult because it was the first time I would fully, speak English all the time.
Mm.
And I think, we are always afraid of making mistakes and so forth. And then I accepted the challenge to relocate to Germany. I had to say, I mean, here in Berlin, there's a lot of foreigners, so it's very multicultural, and that means you can survive with English, but you always have to keep in mind, that at least you need to know some basics because you cannot think about like receiving letters or going to the bank and expecting that everyone is gonna um, speak in English, even though many people do it. But
Mm.
yeah, just like in my defense, I mean, not in my defense, disclaimer, my German sucks. I mean, I survive. I survive, and I constantly learning. But yeah, so I think now I feel way more confident, and I'm not afraid of making mistake, which is always the painful part of speaking a
Yeah.
language. Yeah.
Mm. Do you think that non-native people have to fight more to get the same recognition, or that it's more difficult that companies that are led by native people can let you opt for better positions if you are
Mhm.
non-native?
I
How
think,
do
I
you feel
mean,
like that?
yeah, no, that you raise a very interesting point here, especially since communication is very important nowadays, and um, and unfortunately, there is this unconscious bias. We many times, I had to say at SoundCloud we were big defenders of that, and I had to give a +1 to SoundCloud in this sense because we had a lot of workshops for unconscious bias. I cannot give many details because most of the time all these workshops,
Mhm.
stay there. But like one of the things is about communication, and I'm pretty sure we all live this situation where, when you're not properly communicating, you sound like not very smart. And I think that's unconscious bias, and it's proven it is that way, especially when you listen to someone, or at least unconsciously in the beginning or a few years ago, then you learn over the time, that that's not true. But like again, it's unconscious, and when you listen to someone, struggling a lot with the communication, you had to help instead of like judging, and we as human beings tend judge, unconsciously again, like, of course. But I would say it could, for some companies, and it happened to me in the beginning while doing interviews, the fact that I couldn't, properly communicate was a red flag. And unfortunately, it's the real truth. I'm not saying I encourage everyone to do that, but then I thought, I mean, if this company is judging me for my communication skill set, and it's not a key part or a super key part of my job, then probably I don't want to work for them. You know what I mean? Because
Totally.
if communication is key in your role, I mean, let's say you
Yeah.
had to speak at conferences, then of course it's a key part of it, and you had to really evaluate that part. But if it's not, I mean, we can always learn, right? I mean, we get better. I have to say, like, I improved my English here in Germany. In the US, that was helpful as well, but it was, I was living in a kind of a bubble, and yeah, I was speaking English, but not 100% of the time. Well, here it's in part German, which is a tiny bit, which is this part for living your day-to-day life. But work wise, it's mostly English. So the conclusion to this is, like, don't be shy, and it doesn't matter. I mean, if I were to interview someone, I'm not judging for that. And we need to all learn out of that, and learn that it's part of the learning process as well.
Yeah, and in my personal experience, I also think that when we think we cannot define ourselves in some matter, like the language, for instance, we usually make some assumptions of what people are thinking about us, and we think that we are bad at something, but in the end, we are doing it good enough to define ourselves. So I also
Yeah,
want to encourage people not to think they cannot do something just because the language, because that's something that you can keep improving and never gets perfect.
absolutely.
They probably native people will listen to us and will think that that our accents or our English is not very good, but we are
Yeah,
here talking in English to the rest of the world, so
I mean, yeah, we're
everyone can do it.
absolutely, and we are putting an effort here, and just like, to raise a point here, my English teacher, back in the days, mentioned that your accent is what makes you charming. So, not like, for all the language learners over there, definitely don't be afraid of making mistakes. In the end, no one is perfect, but it's a learning process, and we are constantly getting better and better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely agree with your teacher.
Nice,
So,
nice.
moving to another very different point, you talk a lot about kindness and how to help each other to grow yourself. And how do you think this has helped you in your life, and how do you apply it to your day to day?
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, I've been learning a lot over the years, and I had really good mentors. And I couldn't mention everyone who was part of, my learning process, but you have, like, these key people, and I had to mention Jorge Barroso. So he was one of the key people, in my professional uh, life, let's say, at least, when I relocated to Spain. And then, of course, I got to know you and many other people who introduce way more information. And when you see yourself, like, alone, and you need help, and you're receiving that help, is that you see that as an example. I mean, I'm a big believer of sharing stuff, sharing knowledge, and I love mentoring. I think is the way to go. And the way that applies to my career is, like, I'm trying to always not only share, but also learn and, like, collect feedback in order to get better. I think feedback is always nice, in order not only for personal purpose, but also on how to learn what you're doing wrong. I like, for example, a lot to have all this. That's why when you invited me, then I said yes right away, because I think this is about sharing. This is about and learning too. I'm pretty sure I'm going to learn out of many questions, and you can learn out of anything and out of anyone. I always say, like, one of the key things is, like, if you're an experienced professional over there, it's like the best questions come from junior people, from people, when you were starting. Yeah, you had a lot of questions, and, like, super curious questions, and and most of the time it's like, oh, let's say, just to give you an example, I was pairing lately with a person, a very young developer, and then you start writing code, and at some point, sometimes there's, like, again, like, this unconscious bias of respect because of the fact that you're kind of older. but like, yeah, I'm constantly encouraging people to ask questions. I was pairing with this person, and it was like, yeah, she asked me something, and it's like, oh my god, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it's like, and then we came up with a solution, or in this case, with an answer. So I think I like to talk to junior developers and people who are starting into this as well. That's very valuable to me, and of course, very experimented and experienced people. Of course, you get a lot out of that. But in terms of questions and the tricky questions, I think those are mostly coming from people who are, jumping in.
Yeah, because
That's
they probably ask for things that you also already gave for granted, and they didn't ask you that. And I don't know why I do that. I just do it like this, and they make you think about it again and consider your solutions, because maybe you are just doing it because you have been doing it like that for a long time, and it's not the perfect way.
absolutely, absolutely, totally agree. And that's the way. I mean, mostly. I mean, I think there is, like, this, continuous improvement and constant learning. Even though that doesn't mean that we had to all the time consuming content out there. That's probably another interesting topic, content consumption, because of all the information being generated. There's smart ways of learning, and that's how I try to apply, by in taking my time in order to learn, but also, balancing a little bit technologies and knowledge with other personal activities.
Yeah, that's another thing I usually try to show also, that no people doesn't need to know about everything. That
Mm.
we are, in the end, need to focus on something, and I always try to be very transparent with that, because I think it's important that we that share content, usually other developers think that we know everything, and if we show that it's not the case, probably the pressure over there is less higher.
Yeah.
I always say that, for instance, I haven't barely used RX Java, which is one of the most used things by everyone, and everyone are supposed to know about it, or like this, many other things, and I think it's a good way to show, because the pressure in this sector and in this industry is pretty high related to this.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I just say, like, the amount of articles sometimes and this is something I learned from the past, and there's a lot of content every day, a lot of information out there, and we want to be up to date with every single thing, and it's impossible. And there's so many opinions, there are so many people talking about specific topic, and it's impossible to keep up to date. And that generates this social pressure sometimes. And I've been talking to people now. I've been trying to encourage, or at least to give some advice on this. You cannot know all, as you pointed out, but you can have a taste of that, but you don't have to get crazy about it. I think always, learn depending on what you're working on in this case. And if you want to learn something else, but don't put pressure on yourself. And this is something that I like to mention. Like, I think that we are the ones putting pressure on ourselves. If you think about it, no one is actually pointing us with a gun, right? I mean, if
Yeah.
you're a good professional, you always know how to say no or I don't know, and I think that's key. That's key. And I think I sometimes I do some social experiments with some people, and like ask some questions, in the sense of being funny, trying to ask different questions about specific topics which I have no idea about.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, sometimes we as human beings don't want to say I don't know. It's like you always like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I heard about that, or like there's like these funny statements. I heard about that. Ah, yeah, I think I check it out, but I'm not an expert on the field. Or that sounds very familiar, and these kind of helpers.
Yeah.
For me, it's way easier to say, "Oh, I don't know. I have no idea what you're talking about."
Yeah, this goes so fast that we cannot know about everything, and
Yeah,
it's good to keep it in mind. So, but anyway,
yeah,
moving to another topic that we
yeah.
could be talking about this for hours.
Forever.
Uh, let's move to know a little more about you, about your hobbies. I know that nowadays you are a big fan of cycling. Have
Yeah.
you always been into sports before, or that's a recent hobby? Or and how do you feel about this new hobby? Is impacting your life in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's another. That's why I like the way you're shaping this live cast, or yeah, or podcast, or whatever you want to call it.
It's difficult to define,
Yeah.
so let's not
You see,
use labels for it.
naming things is always complicated. But yeah, getting back to your question, I think I was always a big fan of outdoors activities, since I was a kid. But it's not, I mean, I do sports. I used to run, but then I had a knee injury, so I couldn't do it anymore. I can still do it, but I had to take care of myself, so I cannot run that much. And I got into cycling the last few years because of that. It was a way to replace kind of replace, I would say, running. But to be honest, I love it. Um, and it's not about the sport, because by doing sports you get a lot of health benefits. You don't have to overdo it and so forth. Yeah, I do a lot of kilometers, and I learn out of that too. Sometimes I would kill myself and say, no, this is senseless. I'm just suffering. I'm not enjoying anymore. But um, I like adventure sports as well, but everything that I do sports related, for me, it's a way to turn off my head. I try to have a good work-life balance, and that means, catching up with friends, not forgetting about that, doing some sports, traveling. These are the things that I think are very healthy in terms of your body in general. And again, it's another lesson learned. I mean, in the past, I had health problems because of that. Because of we need to be aware that in our job, most of the time we spend a lot of time sitting. That could bring up back pain, headaches when you're spending a lot of time in front of the computer. Problems with your view. It's not as easy as it sounds, right? I mean, sitting in front of the computer, and I kind of like that. I kind of I forget about everything. When I'm on a bike in this case, or when I'm doing something else. I think that we need to definitely take care of our health here. And never forget. Like, for example, another advice is like, do some standing programming, get a standing desk if you don't have one, and just like, switch between sitting and standing. Sports, again, like that's another reason. It's not only my hobby, but I see benefits out of that. And definitely, you don't have to kill yourself again. But
Yeah,
just a way to step out.
moving our body is really important in our case, that we spend at least 8 hours in front of the computer.
Yes, yeah,
So, we
exactly.
need some things to disconnect our body and our mind from
Yeah.
this day to day.
And it helps, like sometimes, at least I know myself. I know that I no longer productive after 9 hours, and that means, if I work more than that, then I don't know, 20% effective, and that means it's way better if you just, step out, go do something else, get back, sleep, or do something, and then it's normal, right? That happened to all of us, the day after, when you're trying to find a solution for something, then you, at some point, you just wake up and say, oh, here it is, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. There's disconnection points. It always happens that you go to bed and the next day everything fixes by itself.
Yeah.
That
Right, absolutely. No, it's a good way to solve a problem. Go and sleep or do something else. Grab a beer with a friend. Yeah.
totally agree with that.
Yeah.
When you think about your long-term future, how do you see it? Do you think you'll keep devoting to software development, or you don't have this kind of long-term vision of your future?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, by being 38 years old person, so I think that the natural process, I mean, sometimes we see that the natural tendency is like, oh, you become a developer, and then over the years you ended up more into a management position, right? Managers, and most of the time, and there is this stereotype that managers are usually older or more experienced people, which at some point is true, but I don't believe in that. I think there's room for parallel career path in terms of technical details and more like people, problem solving, or project management, let's say. In my case, personally, I think like gradually I'm moving towards a more engineering manager position. Well, now I'm doing more developer relations, which is 50% of my time coding, to be honest. But it's complicated. I think the other thing that I noticed, and please share to the audience, share your thoughts or your experience in this field. In this field, it's like, the older you get, the slower you are when writing code.
Yeah.
When I was talking about all these juniors, developers, coming out of university, or like there's all this excitement, and I might sit down with many of them. It's like you see screens, appearing and disappearing, like, writing code super fast, and you cannot follow anymore. But and but you contribute with the experience here, like you probably, I at least in my case, I'm way slower, but like it's, you have this experience, you stop by, you think about the solution, and you stamp it. And I think this comes with experience. With that being said, I think I'm moving towards more, an engineering manager position, which is something I've done in the past, and I like that. At least it's a good balance, because I still keep the technical part, which is something I'm very passionate about, and also I like to solve people's problems. I like to listen. I like to mentor. I like to collect feedback. I like to help other people to develop their careers, based on experience, right? On from all these years that you've seen many things, that you've been collecting feedback and information and experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. We are in in the knowledge era, so
Yeah.
being able to to learn things and show it to others, it's clearly a great way to go.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But one thing is like, don't do it. I nowadays there is sometimes like again like this pressure of, you know, like you have to because of social media and
Mhm.
shit, let's say. And I think like you know, you can detect whether that's very artificial or not. You know, many people could be part of your job, which is amazing, and you're doing, but like do it because you feel it, because you like it, because not because of like social media pressure, you know, and social media exposure and so forth. I think in my case, I give a talk, or you know, the same way as we have been discussing, Antonio, when you post something, it's like because we have something to say, you know, we
Mhm.
have something to share, we have this experience, and we want to expose it, we want to showcase it, and so forth. And sometimes that's why sometimes I stay in a limbo, because I don't have much to say. I like to get into discussions and share and learn, but I don't do it. Or I think, you know, many people don't do it because of social media exposure. It's
Yeah.
mostly, it should come out of, you know, your feelings, your, yeah, your body. You know, spread the word. That's it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think in the case of blogging in particular, I think it helps in many ways because it helps you organize your ideas, and as you mentioned before, you learn from the comments of other people that has a different point of view. So I always to encourage people to do blogging and to write blogs because you learn about a lot about it,
Mm.
and the exposure and all that can be as a side effect, but I think that many of the benefits of it are not so visible, and you find them when you start writing about it and sharing your knowledge with the rest of people. I
Yeah,
say blogging, but also talks or whatever the way you want
absolutely.
to express your knowledge.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's so many ways, and it's about, and in other words, it's a way to give back to the community, right? I mean,
Mm.
it's like we're constantly using libraries, third-party libraries, or nice jobs done by other developers, professionals, and so forth. And why not giving that back to the community? And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm not contradicting myself and saying, oh, there's many ways to give back. You don't have to go on stage if you don't like it. You don't have to write a post if you don't like it. You can also go to an event and you know, spread the word, talk to other people, and that's a way to share as well. You know,
Yeah.
and there's so many ways. The only advice I have here in terms of exposure, and I think it's the way to go, and I'm a strong believer of that, is like having a GitHub repo. I think nowadays and this happened to me, you know, some time ago when I interview people, or when I was interviewed by other people. So this is an advice to have like some kind of pet project where you write some code and so forth. So I believe that you can avoid all these sometimes stressful code challenges that you had to go through when you're doing an interview. So, for example, in my case, I would have skipped that out if I see someone, you know, someone's code on GitHub. That's it. I mean, I don't
Mm.
need to evaluate that and put the candidate into some pressure of that. I think this is the way to go. So this is the only advice, and it doesn't require much. You know, you just grab Raspberry Pi or some super funny project and start writing some code. Just, you know, keep it there just as part of your portfolio.
Yeah, I think that's also an important point. We are not getting into interviews today because we could be another hour talking about that and about
Yeah,
the processes.
yeah,
But I totally agree that if you have a good pet project that shows off your knowledge, it probably help you in many processes, and that's a great way to show what you know and and yeah, have it there
yeah,
so that other people can see it and also learn from it. That it's
yeah.
always a good
Yep.
point.
Definitely, it's again like give back to the community. It's like we have the biggest
Yeah,
repository ever, which is GitHub. And
of
yeah,
course. And linking to the last point before the questions from the audience, if you have to recommend just one thing to our listeners about anything IT related or not, what would it be?
so I would say work on your work-life balance, and I seen it over and over, and I have spent a lot of time lately preparing talks, more inspirational talks. That doesn't mean that I'm I was always like as I am nowadays, but I learn a lot out of that. And when I see people getting crazy, and it happened to me to have friends, having health problems, and that includes me, in the past because of getting crazy about that, about work and so forth. Work is part of our life, and we spend a lot of time doing it, and we need it in order to live. But don't put away or put behind other important things in life, which is health, which is people you love, and hobbies that you have. So that's it's not very IT related, but it's like, well, it's IT related if you say like step out of IT and spend more time living life now that we are capable of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, but in the end, we are just one person, and everything mixes. If you don't have a good work-life balance, you won't be able to be good at your job for a long time. You can keep up this amount of work for a short amount of time, but in the end, you will crash at some point. So, I think it's
Totally,
a very good point.
totally agree with you, Antonio.
Okay, and now moving to the question from the audience that I remind the ones that are listening to us that you can send some questions for the guest before starting with it through my email or social networks or whatever. And I have three questions for you. The first one is related to architectures, of course. That's always a
Yeah.
recurring topic. And the question was specifically about MVI architecture, but I think we can give a quick go around architectures and what do you think about them and when we should use one or the other. I don't know. What are your impressions about this?
Well, yeah, you raise a point here. It looks like always this is a recurring answer, right? Which architecture to pick? It depends. There's always it depends. No, I would say architecture is always very important, and I see a lot of different approaches. And when there is like theoretical models, let's say in this case MVI, or when you're talking about onion layers, when you're talking about ports and adapters, when you're talking about clean architecture. And those are all theoretical models. And then when you implement it, there's also different ways of implementing them. So there's many different levels. So, and architecture has always been a topic, in the community. I talked many times about it, and we have been discussing, you and me, many times about it too, how we can deal with this and that in terms of architecture. My advice is whichever architecture you pick, just stick to it. In the case of MPI, for example, I'm not very familiar with the concept. I know it has to do, it's one unidirectional approach, and you can make it reactive. But like what I've seen, I saw one implementation, and it was a little bit messy for me. I don't know if it was the implementation itself, but it has reducers. It was the flow in the end, even though it was unidirectional, there were a lot of many different steps, involved in order to follow up the whole thing. But I know actually people who are using it, and actually Cesar Valiente, he has given a super nice talk about it, and they're using it in production at Microsoft. And and it's working the same way as port adapters is working for other companies, and the same.
Yeah.
And actually, for example, at SoundCloud, we had something that we invented. Let's say it was like called Spoker, and I don't even remember then, because it has to do like each initial would mean something. So you can imagine the amount of layers we had over there. But there was a lot of complexity, and it was based on reacted programming. So it's always a topic, and always it has this. It depends what you're trying to achieve. The other thing I would definitely point out is like, be careful with architectures, like, because there's a bunch of them which are more complicated, others which are more simple. Let's say, let's put, unidirectional architectures are were more complex than model view controller, for example, right? But you had to, in this case, you had to know which is the most useful for you, right? I mean, I wouldn't say if I'm creating an MVP or if I'm in startup, I'm not going to start, two people working in a code base. I'm not going to start like super complex, because that would mean doing a lot of over engineering. And I think we need, again, to balance this piece of thing that we are working on. And so I think that's the main point here. If you pick an architecture, just stick to it, try it out. You can always iterate over that, and you can have your own implementations. When I wrote all these posts around clean architecture, and I always say I haven't reinvented the wheel. I mean, this came from experiences. Actually, at this company in Spain, there was a lot of people who knew a lot about it, but then I just stood up in front of the whiteboard and started shaping some stuff, and it got viral and popular, and many companies started using it. But it's not my idea, it's not my idea at all. But I kind of, it was super useful to me, and nowadays probably it would be my first approach, but it's because I'm experiencing that, and I've been applying it for many other for many projects, and then of course there's different clean architecture implementations as well, and it depends on how you shape your UI layer and many things. I guess that's our experience, right, Antonio?
Yeah.
You've seen so much too, right?
Yeah, I think that we as developer, we have the impulse of trying everything we read, everything that's new, and that's perfectly normal because we are very curious. But in the end, if something is working good for you, then I think it's perfectly normal to stick to it. For instance, if clean architecture or a variation of it is working for you, I think it's great to use it. And in the end, as you mentioned, that's the key point. I think when you start a project, just stick to that architecture, because that's the way all the developers can communicate, and is the best way to start. For instance, if you have to do a new screen, you already knew what the steps are to create that screen, and what are the layers that you have to create. And that's, in my opinion, the most valuable part of architectures, apart from obviously the layer division, and that you can iterate over it better if the architecture is good. But I think that the most important part is that it creates a language and some predictable way to read your code and to create new code. And that's the great part about this.
In summary, like, yeah, as you pointed out, I like the definition of it creates a common language. Where this connects to which, and also, it keeps consistency across your code base. And then whatever, probably you have specific things that apply to a specific part of the code, but still, if you're working on a feature and your code base is super big, and then you had to jump to another feature, you will see that structure normal, familiar. You will feel familiar with it, and yeah, that's something tough to accomplish, to achieve, right?
It is.
Yeah. but in essence, I think that's the core part of having a good architecture. And I think in the end, we are here to solve problems. So there's many ways of solving that problem, and it will depend also in which stage you are, within your software project. I mean, let's say there's like the same way we were talking about good practices and so forth. I remember like reading about this Martin Fowler's concept of sacrificial architecture. So that means, for example, for prototyping, or if you have to develop something super fast, so you will start writing like shitty code, and it's just an architecture that that you're going to throw away, which is something that you had to let the project owner know upfront, because then it's tough. But that has to do with the process, right? But you have to know that all these different ways of problem solving exist out there, and that's another thing. I mean, you don't have to you can have a wide picture of what's out there and then pick the right tool based on your requirements.
Perfect. I think that's a good summary about
Yeah.
what we think about architectures. And the next trending question these days: what do you think about Flutter?
Oh my God. Yeah, I remember like catching up with you some time ago and say, okay, Antonio, what's Flutter? Could you give me some insights on this? Uh, and I mean, to be honest, I haven't played much around Flutter. I actually told you offline, but I had to say, I don't know if it's another attempt of cross-platform development. There's so many options there, and I'm seeing like a huge battle of companies and projects trying to fight against each other. Who's gonna win this battle? Who's gonna stay there as the best cross-platform development solution? And I think I'm seeing Flutter. I mean, we cannot skip it. I haven't played with Dart. I heard like you actually told me you've been playing a little bit around lately, and
Yeah,
or
very
and
little, but yeah,
yeah,
I tried something.
but still, like I don't know. I think I saw it in the past a little bit, but with Kotlin, in action, then it's tough, to get a good programming language as good as Kotlin. I'm probably a big defender of it. But
Yeah.
especially for mobile development, when it comes to other platforms, I don't like much JavaScript, even though it's very powerful. But with Dart and Flutter, we kind of make it invisible because Google is behind it, and it looks like there's a few projects going on. In my opinion, it's a bet. If you feel like this is gonna succeed, then go for it. I mean, in my case, I'm not even curious about it yet. I want to see a little bit more because it was in beta till 1 month ago, or a couple of months ago, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah. So that's my opinion. But probably, hold on, one thing. Probably for people who are coming from web development, it's the same as with React Native. Saving the difference, right, in terms of how they work internally. Um, Probably it's way better, for them, instead of jumping in to Kotlin and native development. It might depend on the people you have in your team, for example. And I remember, like, just to put an example, at SoundCloud, when React Native came out, there was a new project for music creators, and that would involve web and a mobile application. And we had like super nice web developers, and they came up with such a good solution, a simple solution, but a good one, super well architecture for both iOS and Android using React Native. So I guess it's a bet. And to be honest, I want to see it, in action. I want to see what Google comes up with Flutter. Yeah.
Yeah, the same here as we talked. I just started taking a look at it because a lot of people is asking and I don't know what to answer. So I decided to start learning a little about it and have a more good idea of what you can do with it. But
Right.
as you mentioned, to me, it sounds like a bet, like the one we had 3 years ago or so with Kotlin, that it could perfectly uh, be reduced to nothing or grow until becoming a popular solution. So
Yep. Yep.
from what I know about Flutter, that is almost nothing. I think that's similar. That we have another cross-platform solution that looks to be working pretty good for simple apps and in fact, for not only for Flutter but for cross-platform solution in general, I think they are a very good solution for companies that are just starting and don't have many resources to create their first
Yep.
MVPs and run with and start with them and I think that's always a good point from cross-platform solutions and then it depends on how the company grows. You
Mm.
may think about making it native or if it
Mm.
works for you, continue with that.
Yeah, totally. Plus, I would also add, you can always use or have like a hybrid approach, like, I mean, again, I've seen, for example, React Native or not Flutter yet, but I've seen React Native, as a way of developing common functionality for a mobile solution. Let's say things are, because I think like the problem comes when there is a lot of complexity, and at least with React Native, the way the threading works and this monothread model and so forth. But for example, things that could be reused, for both, the most popular platforms, in this case, Android and iOS, could be, for example, a login screen. A login screen could be developed once, and usually, and I would say 99% of the cases, the UI, it's also similar. You always have like two text boxes and one login button, and so you could actually reuse that. And I think that that's another kind of in the middle, solution, by having, like, as you pointed out, one on one side, having a full React Native slash Flutter slash cross platform development solution.
Yeah.
The other side of the field is to have a fully native application, both. I mean, let's say for both, and then the other is hybrid. And I would say it depends.
Yeah, in fact,
Sorry.
at my previous company, we had it like that. We had a screen that was pretty customized, even when doing it for a native platform. So it was decided to be done in React Native and reuse it in mobile TV platforms, and it was pretty good for that case in particular. I don't know if the
Right.
whole app could have been done using React Native, but for that specific screen, it worked pretty well.
That's it. Yeah, and you see like tons of companies, jumping in and sharing their experiences as well. And yeah, let's see what happens. I'm curious, and if there's someone in the audience who's been using it, please share. I think we're all very curious about it, and I want to see more, real solutions with these cross-platform frameworks. Yeah.
Great. So the last question before you start with your talk.
Oh, okay.
This is going a bit long, but anyway, I think it's been really interesting, so I don't mind very much how long it is.
I was sorry. I would try to squeeze the talk and go to the most interesting part.
No problem at all. Take the time you need. So the last one was this is very little generic, but anyway, some strategies to build up a team in a healthy way. If
Hmm.
you in your
Yeah,
experience,
I can give some insights on team building and team structure. I think, I mean, in terms of hiring, for example, I'm not a strong believer of the algorithmic part, and as these big companies do, like, unless that it's part of your position, or that's very specific. If you were to apply for, I don't know, a super, I don't know, data scientist position, then you probably need, or working with neural networks, then you will probably need, linear algebra and all this kind of complex stuff, for me at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so you have to bet on in a healthy way. I mean, probably the question is not pretty clear, but I would try to give some insights on this. So I think you had to uh, really invest a lot of time in writing the right people in terms of human or soft skills. I would definitely say, at least in my experience, I would definitely prioritize that over knowledge, because we all learn. So with that being said, I remember like at SoundCloud, I was being part of the hiring process, and if you would apply, back then you had to pair with me, during the Android interview on site, and and to be honest, I mean, these are a few tricks. I would try to make the the candidate super comfortable with me, and I was not evaluating actually technical skills. I was evaluating. It was a pair programming, a pair programming session where we would definitely do pair programming. I could start pairing. I could start writing the code, which might sound like a little bit weird because I'm kind of interviewing, but I didn't want the candidate to feel like that. And I was evaluating, or I would definitely evaluate whether the candidate is easygoing, if he or she can accept feedback, if we can work together, switching keyboards, helping me to solve this problem and so forth. And I think that makes it pretty healthy. I would definitely, my advice again here is prioritize human being features, or soft skills, like a person being respectful, a person being nice, easygoing, and always willing to help. We all have our bad days, and that's something that happens, and that includes myself. But you learn over the time, and that makes you a better professional. For me, it's like I would not want a smart ass, or a know-it-all person if this person is not very easygoing or easy work with. So the healthy way for me is to invest on the human part of that, and it's probably the most complicated, because I always say, like, computers are predictable, uh, human beings are unpredictable. But
Yeah, that's something
but
difficult to
yeah,
discover in a short talk or in a
yeah,
short interview,
yeah,
but yeah, it's definitely the best,
yeah,
the most important part to, because you are working in the end, you are working with them
yeah.
every day, 8 hours per week per day, so yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can always, like, again, like, outside this, please feel free to spit out questions or ping us on Twitter, on any social networks. I think we are very easy to find people, fortunately, and even just you can provide my emails. I'm always willing to help and to listen and to collect feedback and to provide feedback. Yeah.
Great, perfect.
Cool.
Thank you so much for this part,
No.
and then let,
All right.
let's move to the talk.
To the top.
So
Okay, cool.
I move into the slides, and you can
Nice.
start when you want.
Yeah. So is it? Yeah. So I don't know. You just, yeah.
Yeah, should be showing already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's showing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Cool. So it's just like, yeah. So just let us know if there is something wrong with the presentation. So I'm gonna. This presentation actually is titled "The Art of Coding Disasters and Failures." This is something I have been given in the past, but I, constantly changing it. Um, and it's about failures and disasters that I made as a professional, that we're talking about more. I don't know, let's say, yeah, informally. Um, and let's get started. I will try to squeeze it a little bit and go to the main points and give you some advice on what are the most painful areas you should keep an eye on. in order to make the mistakes or failures I made in the past. Well, I'm not going to introduce myself here, but let's get started with, with all of us, right? When we are writing our first lines of code and you start learning, as I pointed out with Antonio, you spend this nights, trying to compile, anything compiles, and you start like making your first mistakes. You get into a job and it's like you're the new person, you're inexperienced, and you start making a couple of mistakes, which are probably tiny ones or not, but I think that we're all familiar with that. So the first quote here in this talk is, for me, it's like a person who never made a mistake, never tried anything new. This is a real truth. We're curious people, at least we're introverted people as well, most of the time. We can turn into extroverted people, but we always love to try things, new things, right? I mean, you always want to try a new library, a new programming language, and why not? And especially when you're working for in a project, or like you are always willing to introduce the latest technology. It doesn't matter what, but then we can see the consequences. But that's the formal definition of that for me. And I'm gonna put a quick story that I had in the past. It was, I would say, one of my biggest mistake in the last couple of years, I would say, while working at SoundCloud. So here's what happened. So just to give you an overview, I don't know, can you see the arrow, like when I'm pointing something or not?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna be using that. So this is a big picture of, while I was working at SoundCloud as a part of core engineering, then in the beginning Android team and so forth. But this is a big picture of the architecture we had back then. So there was a clients. So in this case, web clients, Android client, and iOS client, which of course were using an API mobile, and there was an API web. So we call this pattern, just for information, BFFs, which is a pattern that came out of this solution, I think. Many other companies are also using it, which is called backend for frontends. So which means, every single client will have a different backend depending, or a bunch of clients will have different APIs depending on the requirements or the data they are consuming. So of course, we had like production and development environment for those APIs. And as part of the team, we were responsible for maintaining the APIs. Okay? Yeah. So the thing is, it was my second week at SoundCloud, and someone actually asked me whether I wanted to be the release captain for this release. I mean, it was, and I accepted the challenge. I said, yeah, why not? Let's do this. But there was a lot of misinformation in this case. But I accepted the challenge. I needed to release an Android application for 100 million users. And that's a good point, because remember that the more users you have, I mean, if you screw it up, you screw it up at a big scale. That's the point here. So what happened? Back then, we didn't have a very mature continuous integration environment. And there were a lot of, or a few manual steps involved in the release process. So I needed to release this application. We were using a release train model, which for all of you who don't know what it is, it's about releasing every 2 weeks or every specific amount of time. So the train departers every 2 weeks, let's say, and all the features that are ready to be shipped, they jump in, they get in. So I accepted that, and one of these manual steps before shipping the application was to change the mobile endpoints from production from development to production, right? We were using that, and that's what happened. So I forgot to change the endpoint, so our production application would point to development. And that's not a big deal. I mean, because most of the time, um, probably, I mean, if you have feature parity, development and production is kind of similar, So in our case, but the problem was that our development environment consisted of two Mac Minis, So these two Mac Minis were feeding 100 million users, in our Android app. So you can imagine such a disaster. But so what I did there is like I went back home, and I'm gonna go back here. So I went back home with my already shipped. It was working on my phone because it always works, right? And no one had the application, and it was working, pointing to the development version of the API. And I went back home, I remember, and we deployed the app to the Google Play Store, and then I couldn't play a song, which was our core functionality in the company. So I got a phone call from someone very important in the company and say, who told me, okay, so you're Fernando, right? And it's like, yeah, you're the release captain for this. Yes. I don't know if you noticed, but like I cannot play a song. And it is some point when I got freaked out, and I just, hung up and called my mom, like here, like, like it was a way to just, get out of the situation. And it's like, and I was telling her, like, after this situation, I will leave the end of the story and how we solved such an issue to the end of the talk. But I was talking to my mom. I was telling her, yeah, mom, I'm gonna be the worst employee ever. I'm gonna last only 1 week. So that was the issue. So 100 million users not being able to play a song, a core functionality. So, but what happened? My mom said, yeah, may the force of failure be with you. And I kind of, she didn't say that, but I related kind of the idea. Say, okay, my son, it's not that complicated, right? Mom, you have no idea. So the thing was, I want to gather all the information and squeeze it into may the force of failure be with you, and especially with you guys out there when you're making a big mistake, right? So with that being said, let me bring up a fact here. I think we know that our software is terrible. That doesn't make it any special, We know that we are all dealing with bugs, we're technical debt, we are dealing with inconsistency, we're dealing with a lot of, bad things. And we know that that's true. I have never seen a health code base, and if you guys have, a health code base, just raise your hands because I wanna hug you. That never happened to me. So with that being said, and talking about mistakes and things like that, I wanted to kind of let's say group different types of mistakes that we make in our software development cycle. Let's get started with product mistakes. So I'm gonna go, talking a little bit about these different groups, but I'm gonna focus mostly on the technical side of things. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to mention product mistakes, because that could actually impact our technical team. So products, for me, product mistakes, and this was very funny when I was preparing this talk, because I was diving into the internet and trying, to see probably these are not product mistakes. Then I checked the startups who developed these products that I'm gonna mention here, and they probably didn't, it was not very good for them. But the first one, it was like, with all this Internet of Things, I came up with the Fit Spoon. So basically, this is smart spoon. We all like smart devices nowadays. So basically, this spoon, what it does is like, if you're eating soup and you're eating too fast, it's going to release the content, based on, it's going to open up these holes and it's going to release the content. So it's not going to let you eat pretty fast in order to control yourself. And then it will track your eating speed, and it will compare with a cloud database with other people. So if you're interested in one of these smart devices, big bets in terms of products, that is the way to go. Then there was this curious one, the Throne Master. The Throne Master was pretty pretty funny, because you can gamify your daily emotions. That's how they sold it. When I was reading about this, this was pretty curious, because it says that you can, spread your feelings in the toilet, compare yourself with your member of your families, quantify the amount of feelings that you're spreading, and say, "Oh my God, man, who's buying this?" I mean, I don't want to see any of you just going there and having one of these. I mean, raise your hand if you have one of these. I'm super interested. But that was that was part of the joke, right? Let's say. The thing is, like, internet is very wide and big. But yeah, let's get serious again. So getting back to the type of mistakes that we make, it has to also, we have process mistakes. I think that what happened to me there, by not being able or to change this endpoint, was a process mistake. Clearly, for me, it was probably an onboarding mistake. The onboarding process was not pretty clear. There was some missing information there. And for me, all this process mistake has to do with, everything related in the cycle of software development. Let's say not only releasing, as it happened to me, but also hiring, management, and so forth. Everything that involves a process in your development cycle, then it has to do with a process mistake, which that's a clear example of what I pointed out before. But again, we're here to talk about coding mistakes. I think that's the title mostly of the presentation today. And I wanted to bring this up because this is something, these are basic things, but sometimes we're always, there and making the same mistakes. And I want to show you, what I learned. I'm going to give you a big overview of what I learned over the past and what are, basic things that we need to keep an eye on in order to avoid this kind of mistakes. So let's get started. Readable code. This is one of the things. When I'm talking about readable code, I'm just saying that code must be self-explanatory. I'm not a strong believer of comments. That's the first thing. Like when we see comments, in our code base, that's telling us something, that the code itself is not clear. It's not self-explanatory. So, and they're always outdated. So I would definitely say skip comments. And try to rename and refactor. Those are your friends. And you can see, this is a funny comment, and it's like very popular in GitHub and on Stack Overflow. And it's like, the guy here is saying with this comment, just say, if you're trying to optimize this routine, just that was a terrible mistake. Just increase the counter so we can know how many hours wasted we have had so far. So and there's many things. Those are extreme cases, but like when I wrote this, only God and I understood what I was doing. Now God only knows. That's a common thing. And the second one, actually, I have to give credit to me. It was funny because I was diving into some C# code. No, it was not C# actually. Visual Basic code that I wrote in the past when I started. And I checked that out, and there was a comment saying, before modifying this code, please call me. And I put my email. So then I was trying to understand myself, like what the hell I did want to say with this, and I couldn't even understand. And that took me to the other comment, which is like, not only God knows what's the logic here. So avoid comments. There's this piece of code. I was actually mentioning the algorithmic stuff. This code has to do with, balancing and deleting a node from a red-black tree. It's very complex. I mean, in the end, we always have complexity in our most of the time we have complexity, but that doesn't mean we can deal with it. I mean, the complexity must sit somewhere in our code base, but always hide complexity. You can always rename things. It's not the same if I go back to the previous one and you see all this piece of code without a proper naming or without a proper refactor. But here we're going more, we're getting it more clear by just renaming, refactoring, and separating different pieces of logic into smaller things. So always keep that in mind, high complexity, and always refactor. What else? This is another good one. I remember having a conversation with someone from a colleague, a few years ago, and he got into the same situation as I did here. So some time ago, I was struggling with a piece of code. And if you check this code is written in Finnish. So I'm a big defender, and we were talking with Antonio about, learning languages and so forth. And those are very useful for this, for communication, but not for programming. So code must be written in English. So when dealing, so this is the same code. It's not the same like saying mobile repository here, and then I say Elocuba Arquisto. So it tells, a difference. Even though I love Finnish and I like the language and I like multicultural stuff and so forth, but please, code written in English. I remember, sorry, a friend of mine actually, Jorge, ran into the same situation in the past. And that reminded me of when I was a few months, it was a year ago, struggling with the same thing. So it's a reality. Please, code written in English. And again, sorry, the conclusion for this is like, always code as this is a very popular statement that we should always keep in mind as developers. And it's always code as the person who is going to maintain our code is a serial killer. And this person actually knows where we live. So this is something that we should print out and put it, in front of us. The reason is because we most of the time spend more time reading code than writing it. So and code is communication. So be kind to the person reading your code and try to do your best. So here's another important aspect: reinventing the wheel. We love to reinvent the wheel. And this is something, sometimes it's like, and I have a clear example of this. And this is something that I did in the past. And I would say, so let me put back the situation. I was developing a system to run under Windows with C#, right? And at some point we needed to compress a few files and send it over email. So I said, okay, cool. So we're gonna re-implement this because WinZip and WinRAR, which were those, compressors, very popular compressors that work pretty well, I just felt like I was coming out of the university and I learned this Huffman algorithm, which is about compression, very simple compression. But then I said, no, I'm not gonna use WinZip or WinRAR, which, by the way, they expose an API, or I could have, run a script to compress and those files with those two great tools. But I decided, okay, I'm gonna invent the UltraZip. So it took me like 2 months of development time, and you can see the numbers here. I mean, if you check the numbers, my UltraZip was like, it would only compress to 1%, if you compare with WinRAR and with ZIP, and it would take probably 6 times more. So and we are talking about only 2 megabytes. So what's the outcome of that? Like, don't reinvent the wheel. I mean, it was super nice because I learned a lot about compressing algorithms. I completely forgot, by the way, but if you're gonna do it for learning purpose. There's tons of libraries out there. There's tons of tools developed by other people, by communities. And if you want to learn, just read their code and contribute. As we said before, give back to the community. Why not send in a PR or something like that? And given this situation, I also at some point I also work on a chat built-in assembler. We wanted to reinvent. We wanted to. I don't know. It was a project, but I was with a friend and we developed it using assembler. It was via parallel port between 2 machines, and it was it was a very funny project. But at some point, it was totally useless. But for learning purpose, it's always nice. So if you're going to reinvent the wheel, make sure that you have strong arguments that back you up. Most of the time, it's not necessary. I would say like 99% of the time. So be careful with that. You don't want to spend much time on it. Well, what can I say about this one? Naming things. We were talking about it with Antonio, and actually a good example is like this live casting. That was I remember like Antonio saying, "Yeah, I want to call it live casting, but I still don't know." Anyway, yeah, it's super funny and having a lot of fun here. Thanks for listening, by the way. All the bullshit that Antonio and me are spitting out here. Yeah. So naming is always complicated, and I had to rename this thing here. As you can see, there's my package name here. But a few months ago, I bumped into a code base where I needed to do a network request and parse the response with JSON. So the first thing that comes to your mind most of the time is like, okay, so I'm going to search for a class which is called parser, which makes sense. And then when I type parser on IntelliJ on Android Studio, then 3 results came up. So the JSON parser, which is supposed to be the JSON parser, then there was a better JSON parser, and then there was the best JSON parser. So if I would ask you the question here, which one would you pick? You might not go with the JSON parser because there's a better JSON parser, and you might not go with a better JSON parser because there's one who is the best JSON parser. So since naming is complicated, when you're refactoring, when you're deprecating stuff, you could actually, a trick here is use the deprecated annotation. In this case, you have 3 JSON parsers and you don't know which one to use. I mean, you know that the best is the best, so you probably use the best. But still, with all the tooling we have, since naming is complicated, use extra tools in order to do that. You could actually go and say, okay, my JSON parser could be called legacy JSON parser. I deprecate it with an annotation, which is going to help, with all the warnings when compiling the code. And then you can forward the client of this API to use the new class. In this case, as you can see here, deprecated, use JSON parser. And then the ID is going to help you out and mark, that you're using a legacy deprecated class. So always keep that in mind. If you don't know sometimes how to name, I mean, this is a very nice trick. Always put legacy, use a deprecated annotation, and that's it. Anti-patterns. This is something that you definitely need to know as a software developer. I wouldn't say just read all the anti-patterns out there, but at least have an idea, because the fact that you know anti-patterns and patterns in the end, it creates a common language. When I'm talking about an iterator pattern, or when I'm talking about a listener pattern, or whatever pattern, or a singleton pattern, you know what I'm talking about. The same with anti-patterns. And I will give you a quick sample here. Yeah, for example, lab anti-pattern. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I will quickly explain what a lava anti-pattern is, to give you just an example of that. A lava anti-pattern consists or stands for, different ways of doing the same thing in a code base. That means that, for example, you had to do a network request, you had to perform it, and then you go to the code base, and then you have like 3 different ways of doing the same thing. And then you say, which is the one that I should be using? Which is the one that I should use as a reference? And that's brings us to the latest thing, the deprecated thing, but these are anti-patterns. And if I would talk to you and we were talking, okay, we're suffering from the lava pattern in our code base, then it's very likely that you know what I'm talking about, and I don't need to, give further explanation or that. And I would be super happy to do it, of course. But like, if you have like a base of, the most common ones, I mean, singleton could be another anti-pattern as well. When your singletons are meant for having only one instance of a class, and it should be used, for example, when you have a very expensive object, the creation of this object is very expensive, so you don't want to create it over and over again. But if you're using singleton for save and state, global state, then you will have a lot of weird behavior, and you don't know where that's coming from. So keep an eye on that. Or for example, God classes as well. Many of us have these, God activities with 10,000 lines of code or fragments or classes that no one wants to touch. And all these things, you need to keep them in mind. Have a big picture of that. You don't need to go super deep. The principles, I mean, we have been talking a lot lately, and many people, and a lot of content around clean code and principles and solid and FP principles. So you should know that, of course, we have the solid principles, and those are a good way to make sure at least, your code base has a grade of, good grade of quality. But if you have like an FP or a functional programming background, you should know that there's principles for that too, the equivalents from the solid principle from object-oriented programming. And I'm not going to mention them here, but like, I guess Antonio is going to share this presentation afterwards, so you can go and check it out later and dive deeper if you're interested into those. The same way as was talking about anti-patterns, the same way applies to patterns. Pattern it's what's a pattern in the end? It's a solution. It's a common solution or a proven solution to a recurring problem. It's been proven and it works. So learn about patterns. Again, like when we're talking about patterns, and it creates this new common language. And sorry for that, but I repeat things so we can keep them. Or at least because of my age, I am forgetting things, so I need to repeat them. And that creates code consistency as well. So go for them as much as you can. And the Boy Scout rule. This is a very common or simple idea, and it's what does that mean? I mean, always refactor your code, but little by little. So what happens, like with Boy Scouts, it's basically when they're gonna leave the place better than they found it. And so that means when you're diving into your code base and you see something, why you don't just rename it? You don't have to perform like a super huge refactor that you start refactoring your stuff and go, and then you are in the middle of a mess and you're rolling back. But you can do it. This is you can do it in baby steps. Whenever you're working on something else, you see something, just refactoring. It's a continuous improvement. It's an iterational solution. And that's it. I mean, the reason because of all this is because code is communication between people that incidentally runs on computer. All these things are a way, or basic things are a way to avoid bugs and to communicate better when we're writing code. And let me put an extra ball here, since we are been talking about code itself, but like I'm going to give a quick overview of some process or good practices at the process level, which can help out too to avoid this kind of failures. So my advice here is to always work as a team, especially if you have a very tiny team. Communication is way better. It fluids. And do not hesitate to communicate everything and take advantage of that. Share, and don't be shy. Continuous improvement, there's tons of techniques that you can use here and you can go deeper, but like, for example, I mean, you can do retrospectives in order to improve. When you make a mistake, you can do what is called post-mortems, where you share what failed with the rest of the company / team, and you learn out of that and you apply practices so that doesn't happen anymore in the future. TDD, for me, and this is a personal opinion, it's one more tool in your toolbox. If you feel comfortable with it, use it. The red-green factor ensures that you're writing code and tests at the same time. But like, if you have that in mind, I mean, from my perspective, it's not 100% necessary. For pair programming, it's totally fine. Pair programming, again, this could be a topic for another talk, but still, there's tons of benefits out of that. You always have an extra couple of eyes, double checking what you're working on. You share knowledge transfer as well. When if you do cross pair programming between teams and so forth, that could be something very interesting to practice. A good CI pipeline, that means automate all things. Definitely do that. In our case, my mistake actually came out of that, and it's because this manual step was not automated, and I had to do it. And whenever there is a human factor involved, sometimes we forget things and we make these kind of mistakes. And use the best tool for the right job. That means many times, to put an example, I see people using RxJava only for the sake of multi-threading, and it's not its purpose. And so that would mean you're not using the best tool for that. I mean, if you're using Kotlin, you can use coroutines for that, for example, and not introducing such a invasive library like RxJava if you don't really need it, because you're going to be creating a lot of overhead and you're going to end up polluting your code. Just use it. I mean, in conclusion, use it if you have like a lot of streams of data coming from different data sources, and then you have to compose them together and use all these operators that are good for that purpose. And what is this? Zero bugs application. I'm pretty much done. The zero bugs application, you're not probably believe me, but it has to do, it doesn't mean that you have an app without bugs, because it doesn't exist. That we said before, our software is terrible. But that means, to have practices and strategies in order to eradicate all these well-known bugs. Because usually what happens is like you let them to pile up. If you're working on a project, I found a bug. Yeah, what did you do? I just reported, or I put it on GitHub issues, and that's not probably the way to go, because that's endless, and you're only increasing the counter again. So that means have strategies. I mean, I can give you some tips. Let's say you can have bug fixing days within your team, like where the entire team just spend one day, going through the bugs, prioritize them, and working on them. What else? Or allocate one member of the team every sprint for half a day, or for 2 days, or whatever. Try it out in order to address these bugs. So. And yeah, I mean, when you're screwing things up, it's important to recover. And getting back to the story, there was an outage of 1 hour, so none of these Android users could play a song, which meant a big loss for the company for such a big amount of data that we were providing. So what happened in the end? It was pretty. In this case, I was lucky, and it was pretty straightforward to solve the problem because it was basically I needed a phone call to someone from DevOps who would, you know, forward the development endpoint to the production in the end, via DNS and so forth. And it was not a big deal, but it took some time. And you want to make sure that you don't make this such big mistakes, especially when these mistakes affect such amount of users, which means economical losses as well. So fortunately, that went well, and I was not kicked out and fired. And that's it. I mean, from my side, I always learn out of mistakes. I think that's the most valuable thing. Have a hero. In my case, I call my mom, and you might argue and say like, "Oh my God," but it's just like this person that you love, and that gave you love and so forth, and gave you your life. And always test your software, and automate your things. Automate all the things as much as you can, especially these processes that are constantly being repeated and repeated. Again, as we have been talking with Antonio here, share your experiences. You don't have to be on stage if you don't like speaking in public. You don't have to write down blog posts if you don't feel like that. But like you can always, I mean, we all love to go to events, to catch up with other people, meetups, and talk to others, share a beer. And that's a way of sharing too, and giving back, um, there's people who are like me, or actually in this case Antonio, who love to share in spite of our essence and so forth, and whenever we have something to say and so forth. And again, yeah, I think that was the for me the general conclusion of this is like, if you fail, may the force of failure be with you, and take it easy, and it's not the end of the world, and just know that there's people like me who are constantly making mistakes but learning out of that. Again, I don't have much to say. Probably Antonio will take it over here, but and probably, or my data, if you want to reach out to me, it's over there. So Antonio, I'm giving the control to you again.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting, and I agree with all of the concepts you brought out here, and that's a great starting point to make our code and our software better and more reliable.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was going to ask you about what you already shared here. What's the best way for people to contact you while we wait? If someone else want to ask something in the chat, if you want to tell us where we can contact you and all that.
What we can do is like, maybe I don't know, it's something that's coming to my mind, is do it via Twitter, so it's public, and we can continue there. Maybe we can hashtag it with something we come up with. You can share hashtag or something, just to keep track of that, and we can check the hashtag, and we can continue talking about that. I'm super happy to extend all these discussions and learn way more.
Okay, perfect. So when we finish this, the video is already there. That I don't know exactly how it works because this is the first time. I link it on Twitter and add a hashtag, and we can continue from that.
Perfect. Sounds good to me.
I don't see any questions in the chat, so perfect. If
Yeah.
you are happy with that, let's move to the faces again.
Right. Yeah, cool. No, it was amazing. I mean, really had a great time with you. I guess we're wrapping it up here, right? Unless someone wants to jump in. But I had to say it was a pleasure, and I think we should definitely have way more of this. Probably, if you let me, if the audience agrees, maybe we can do it the other way around, and I can use your live cast to interview you. We want to know more about you too.
We can do a special in a special day. I don't know when, but
Yeah, right.
the other way around one day. Yeah, why not?
Commit yourself to the community. They want to know you.
And Gabriel is saying in the chat that he has one question. I don't know if he's writing now. He said
Okay.
that it was very interesting, and I don't know if he's writing something, but
Yeah,
let's wait for a second. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
for
Yeah.
the rest that is listening to this, remember that you can go to Droidkast.LIVE and join there and receive the next episodes. When I am organizing them, I already have 2 or 3 people that already said yes, but I cannot unveil them yet because we don't have a specific date. So stay tuned, and we can continue doing more events like this one that I hope that it's helpful for everyone. And I'm happy to receive any feedback about the length or the
Yeah.
structure or anything. So
Yeah.
if you guys have anything, please let me know.
And from my side as well, like, I mean, I'm super happy to get feedback about, like, a better way of communicating what you felt like I was missing something, or the talk was a little bit boring, or I was addressing specific problems, or I forgot about something. There's, as we said here, like, we're here to get better, to improve, and to have fun as well. So that's very valuable, something we appreciate as professionals.
Nice. So we
Yeah.
already have the question from Gabriel.
Okay, cool.
He has a problem with testing that I want to start. He wants to start with it, but always keep procrastinating it. And if you could give him some advice about how to start with it.
Right. Okay, Gabriel, I mean, or Gabriel, let's say, I don't know where you're coming from. Um, but yeah, so my advice here, it again, like, if you're working on a personal project, that's pretty straightforward. But the thing for me is, like, yeah, we tend to procrastinate about testing, especially for me. The way I look at it is part of the engineering process. Something I don't separate tests and code in the end. Every time I'm writing code, that part of my engineering process is to assert that the code is behaving as I'm expecting to. And that's something that you need to create as a routine. You write code. If you haven't started, if you in your company, no one is doing it. For example, you can start by, whenever you find a new bug in your application, then fix the bug and write a test for that. So you don't have to, you're not gonna find it again. So that's a very easy way of doing that. The other thing is, like, if you have a project and you don't have tests, probably you might have a lot of coupling and a lot of technical debt and so forth. So in this case, my approach would be to start with UI tests. Check it out, the test pyramid: UI test, integration test, and unit test. The unit tests are the easiest to write. UI tests will need a little bit more of infrastructure, but still, like, since you cannot decouple probably your code, or you need tests in order to refactor, because refactoring involves executing tests, so you make sure that you're not breaking anything. Remember that with refactor, you're not changing the behavior of your code, you're changing the internal structure of it. So in that case, write UI tests, and then once you have UI tests that check what you're trying to check as a black box, then you can start refactoring more internally, writing unit tests. So there's different ways. Other things, like do some code katas as well online, and test them if you want to learn out of that. There's many resources to apply, but that would be my main practices if I don't see tests in a code base. Yeah, I hope that helps.
I'm sure.
Antonio, maybe you can add something else, or I don't know.
No, I think you touched all points. I think that for a start, it's better if you do some simple tests on. So probably katas is what works best,
Yeah.
because you can do something simple and test it. Even with TDD, even if you don't use it later, it's very helpful to start learning about unit testing. And and also then the easiest way is to start with bugs. Yeah, that's the thing that is easier, and it will probably be complicated if the code is not prepared. But anyway, with UI tests or end-to-end tests, maybe you can start trying things and changing some code.
And one last thing is like that will tell you how healthy your code base is. Is if you start writing tests and you see, oh my God, I need to mock, or at least I need to mock many dependencies here, or I cannot even run unit tests because of that. That's telling you something. That's a signal that you need to refactor, you need to rewrite some stuff, and that's what testing is trying to tell you. So keep that in mind too.
Good. So Ricardo Costeira has another question. He said, greetings from Coimbra, Portugal. I don't know if you know each other, but
I've been there. Like, oh, super greetings to Coimbra. I love the city and all the people over there. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to go. I've been invited once or twice, but it's becoming a bit difficult for me to travel. So,
Oh God. Yeah. I hope you can make it.
Hopefully, the next one. So he says, regarding clean architecture and dependency injection, do you think it's worth to have your system more specifically your domain logic coupled to the DI framework like Dagger, even if it breaks the dependency rule?
I mean, I would say we should definitely try to separate that. I mean, dependency injection for me, it's in the end, it's an implementation detail, right? I mean, it's not solving any problem. I mean, in the end, if injecting, the classes that you need, in your domain logic, you solve the problem you're trying to solve. I would say if you can have a separated model which injects all this dependency from the outside without touching your solution, then it's going to be even better if you need to refactor stuff, or if you feel like, for example, changing your dependency injection engine. Like I think Antonio and I had a nice conversation about that, and at some point we wanted to migrate from Dagger, or actually, then correct me if I'm wrong, Antonio, but you did it or with coding and so forth. And the more decoupled you are from that, the better, the more flexibility you have. Of course, sometimes it's a trade-off, right? I mean, you have to, for simplicity maybe, and for not exposing specific things, you want to have everything over there. But I would definitely say if you can extract it and use it, it's an implementation detail, and use it from the outside, that would be the best. I would definitely love to see a specific use case if you have it. I mean, we can continue offline or post some talk or some question on Twitter or whatever. That would be my take on that.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's it. We don't have more questions.
Awesome.
So again, thank you very much for your time and for being here today in the first episode.
No, man, it's been a pleasure. I hope you don't kick me out and you invite me again in the future with other topics. So just keep it. But yeah, have to also thanks everyone for who was out there. Hope you found it useful. I think this initiative. Congratulations to you, Antonio, for such an initiative. I definitely support it, and wish you all the best with it. And you and the rest of the community can count on me for anything that I can help out with.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay.
And yeah, that's it. Thanks for being here for the people that are connected live, and for the rest that will be that will watch it later. So and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel or to follow me on Droidkast.LIVE.com. Sorry, Droidkast.LIVE. It's a very interesting domain. Nice. And that's it. We'll see each other in the next episode. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.